here we go. All right, here we have an equation which involves some rational expressions. We have variables in our denominator, and this is y to the second. This has a denominator of just y. Technically, this over here has a denominator of just 1. And we have this equation, and the directions are asking us to solve the equation. One thing about this problem that a lot of people probably dislike is the fact that you have fractions. And the way I have it now, you know, technically, I guess we have 3 fractions, but at least 2 fractions that might intimidate people. And to make matters worse, all 3 parts have a different denominator. So you may remember doing a method where you would solve equations like this. Maybe you remember the phrase rational equations. That means equations with rational expressions in them. Rational ratio, a ratio is a fraction. And when you solve those, you may have solved them by finding a common denominator, and that gets to be a little messy on the paper. But as long as you acknowledge, hopefully you remember from Algebra 2, that you could state a restriction for this one and say that y cannot equal a certain number. I don't know if you want to tell me in the chat what number y is not allowed to equal, and see if anybody remembers what they could say for this over here. Y in this example would not be allowed to equal what number, because it would cause this equation to be undefined.
0.
Okay, yeah, good. Thanks, Marco. It would be 0 because if I plug in 0, 0 squared, or 0 on its own, it's undefined. A fraction with 0 on bottom, 0 over 0 is indeterminate form. We'll talk about that in the future. So maybe you leave that on the side, because what if you solve and you get 0 as an answer? You need to know it's extraneous and you throw it away. We won't get 0 as an answer, but just as a heads up. Now, we were talking about this problem just a minute ago, and we said that the common denominator would be what? What would the least common denominator be? Now, people always have to be careful when they answer this, because the least common denominator, people see the word least and they think little, smallest amount, whatever. And then they want to tell me, oh, it's 1. It's not 1. Or they want to tell me that it's just y. It's also not y. The least common denominator, I always say to think of it as a false cognate. It's actually like a bigger thing that you could turn all of them into where they all match, but at a minimum. So what would the least common denominator be over here? You could answer out loud if you just want to shout out, or Lisbeth, do you want to say what it is?
Y squared.
Perfect, y squared. So Samir told us a minute ago that we could just multiply everything by y squared. If I do that, multiply everything by y squared, I just put big fat parentheses over this whole entire thing. And now I'm going to imagine I'm distributing this y squared to everybody. Now, one thing I always bring up when we talk about this, but make sure you listen carefully to how I'm explaining it, is that you have been taught PEMDAS your whole life, right? Order of operations, parentheses, exponents, multiply, divide, add, subtract. But PEMDAS is sort of a lie, because multiplication and division really are the same thing. So it really doesn't matter which one you do first. The same with addition and subtraction. They really are the same thing. Division is just multiplying by a reciprocal. Subtraction is just adding a negative. Those are interchangeable with each other. So as long as you multiply and divide before you add and subtract, you're fine. Why am I bringing this up? The reason I'm bringing it up is because you want to think smarter, not harder. If you can divide first, right? If you can divide first, well, that means you're likely making your numbers smaller. So when you multiply, you're multiplying smaller numbers instead of larger numbers. Hopefully that makes sense. Do you have a question? What's up, Anna? You have a question?
Do you do the top first?
So
or are you multiplying all of it?
Well, the y squared, when you multiply it, it's over a 1. So it's not like you would multiply it on top and bottom. It really only goes to the top. However, what I was just mentioning over here is that we're going to divide it by the other denominator that's there. So if I multiply y squared over here, I'm not going to write my next step as 4y squared over y squared. Don't do that. Don't waste your time. Okay? So what are we going to do? You're going to think in your head, y squared and y squared reduces, it's gone, it simplifies to 1, and all you're left with is what?
4y squared.
No. Rewind again. Listen again. The y squared, if you multiplied it, you would really have 4y squared over y squared. This one stays, and you would get one of them on top, but we already reduced. This y squared that we distributed already reduced with this y squared on bottom. So what's left
So
over here?
Just 4 over 1, or just 4?
Just 4, right? Just 4. When you're done with this step, you should not have any fractions, okay? No fractions. Everything should clear out. Plus, what could I write for my next term? Anybody want to say what we could write for the next term?
3y squared.
3y squared.
Yes. Good. And then here, careful, y squared with the 8. I'm not writing it, but I'm going to reduce. Divide or reduce. They're the same thing. Y squared over y. I'm reducing it with, and then I have the 8 there. So what do I write down for that step?
8y. Y.
Yes, good. Now, Logan mentioned bringing this over to this side. We could have done that first and gotten it equal to 0, because when we were going over and reviewing solving polynomial equations, that's what we did. We said we want to get it equal to 0 and then factor. But look how this scary looking rational equation turned into a quadratic equation. We're going to subtract that 8y. I'm also going to put it in standard form, descending exponential order. So I'm going to write my next step will be 3y squared minus 8y plus 4 equals 0. So that's where I am right now.
Factor it.
Then we factor, but in order to factor, we want to make sure we get it equal to our happy little 0. If it's not equal to 0, factoring to solve is more difficult because you can't use zero product property unless it's 0. Okay, so any questions before I move on? I don't know if I could see if any hands were raised. I don't think so, right? I just can't see, just so you guys know. Like it makes a little beep noise, you know, when you raise your hand, but if someone leaves their hand up the whole time, it won't beep. So it looks like everyone's is down now, so it's good. All right, from here, I'm going to factor using AC method. You could jump in and participate at any time if you'd like. However, I'm going to try to keep it moving. Well, you want to make sure we use AC method first.
Why is it squared?
Yeah, we have to use AC method. So I'm going to multiply the A. If you remember, like quadratics are in the form AX squared. It doesn't matter, A, X, whatever, plus BX plus C. So I start off with AC method. So A times C, 3 times 4 is 12. I make my list of factors, 1 and 12, 2 and 6, 3 and 4. B for bottom of the list, and B for but what has to equal -8. So Gisbel, do you know what to do next, or do you have a question? Or never mind.
We put the 2 and 6 negative.
Yes, they're both going to be negative. Good, because we found out that we need two numbers that multiply to +12 and add or subtract to -8. So just spell saying, okay, we're going to use -2 and -6. Then we take our first, middle, last, and we split the middle into outer and inner with those two numbers. 3y squared minus 2y minus 6y plus 4 equals 0. So the AC method component of this is done. Now I'm just going to use grouping to do this from here. I'm going to group those two together and those two together. I use a line as a fraction bar and to group them. My greatest common factor in each group, I write it down underneath each line. Since I am undistributing it from the group, I'm technically dividing it, so I like it under the line. My greatest common factor here is
Y.
good, and my greatest common factor here,
2.
2. However, I did warn you about a million times. We always do the sign that's here. So in this case, it would be -2. Then I'm going to pull that out front, because if you're dividing by y, you're also multiplying by y. Longer explanation in the lesson video that I think I have somewhere on my YouTube channel on factoring with AC method and grouping. But if I divide the y, multiply by it. Now here, I always draw my pretzel so that I reduce properly. The pretzel only, this is important when we start doing some of these trig problems, okay? You only pretzel reduce when your numerator has plus or minus signs in it. if everything's being multiplied, you just straight up reduce, like cross it out and it's gone, okay? So 3y squared over y is 3y, and then negative 2y over y is negative 2. Here, if you didn't put that negative on bottom, you're going to really mess this up. So you want to make sure you're paying attention. So I'm going to pull that negative 2 out front, or you're technically multiplying out front since you're dividing by it, whatever. Reduce each oval of the pretzel. Negative 6y over negative 2 is 3y. Positive 4 over negative 2 is, sorry, email's loud, negative 2. From here, this is a step I talked about with you guys, and it kind of shows me who really gets it and who doesn't. This here, 3y minus 2, is our greatest common factor. We have like this big chunky common factor. We have one here, we have one here. I'm going to factor that out front. If I factor that out front, sorry, I ran out of paper. I'm just going here. That's exclamation points. Then I'll have a 3y minus 2 out front, and I don't want to actually lose my happy 0, right? Equal on that side. Then what's left inside? If I factor this out front, it doesn't become squared. You do not have 2 of them. You are undistributing them. When you distribute something, you have one of it and you just pass out. You get one, you get one. It's like it clones itself when it distributes, okay? What's left on the inside, parenthesis, we'll get y minus 2. Then, just to finish out this problem, we solve using a property that I talk about the name of the property all the time because I think names are important. It's called the, anybody remember? 3 words.
Zero product property.
You're the best. So 3y equals 2. That means y equals, again, I'm squishing this, sorry, 2/3, and then y equals 2. Neither of my answers are 0, so they're both acceptable because at the very beginning we said, oh, y can't be 0. So my answers to this problem right over here, all right, my answers that will make this true, that's what solving is. The answers that will make this true are 2/3 and 2. No other number going in for y will make this equation true. Those are the only 2 answers. Is there any question on this example? No one? We're good? So the answer is y equals 2/3, y equals 2. Be careful. Some people like to list their answers with a comma. Then they look at it later and they think it's an ordered pair. So, you just want to make sure you're paying attention to that. Always leave your answer as a fraction and always reduce your fraction. If your answer has a radical in the denominator, make sure you rationalize and simplify your radicals. Hopefully you understand this. If you don't, let me know. Put a thumbs down. But I hope you understand. Okay?